Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on our website, thewww.wine. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find our past episodes on SoundCloud and iTunes.
Wine, wine, wine. Wine, wine, wine. Wine, 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 wine.
Hello again, everybody. How are you, Kim?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Everything is great, and we welcome another special guest. Tim Hanni is here. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners, Tim is the first American to earn the Master of Wine title, I believe it was in 1990. He has decades in the wine industry. He is an author, a chef. He's the founder of winebusinesseducation.com. So, Tim, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, you guys. I appreciate it.
We talked to a lot of authors, and as soon as Mark had this one scheduled, I'm like, I've got his book on my bookshelf. So this was a really exciting interview that we get to chat with you.
Yay.
Yeah, we have so much to ask. But first, Tim, you have such a long and famous, really, wine background and food background. Can you please tell our listeners about yourself and your journey in the food and wine industry?
I would be delighted. So, yeah, I'm really old. So, I mean, that kind of sums it up. But my odyssey started when I was about 14 years old, growing up in Miami. My dad was a member of the Chanderodisseurs and the Physicians Wine Guild. I found wine was a fun topic. This will come out later, a couple oddities about me. One is I'm neurodivergent, so I'm ADHD and I have dyslexia. So I was not a good student. While everybody else was doing flashcards and learning to read, I wasn't. And so back in the late 50s, early 60s, these things weren't really, I was just a problem child. So I was the kid sitting in the corner. But for some reason, I became interested in wine, started looking at different books. I read a different way, so I sort of bounce around from one thing to the next, as I'll do during this interview, and just caught my fascination. So by the time I was 15, I wanted to be in the wine business, and that was not normal back in 1966, 67. When I was in high school, I found that if I could pronounce a two-syllable French wine, nobody would ask for ID. And so that became my social trick. And I know.
That's great. Oh my God.
I know. Can you imagine? We were trying to buy beer at a 7-Eleven in South Miami, and that wasn't going really well. So I went into a Sunset Corners package store. I don't know if you guys know of it, but it became quite the destination. And I'd go in and ask for Corton. And my first score was 1964 Corton Grand Cru Jabelet Verchères, $3.50. Gave the guy $5, gave me $1.50 and said, "Come again." And I said, "You bet your ass." So and my dad was into Burgundy, so was Corton and Volnay and stuff like that. Beaune was only one syllable. And I had started cooking also and reading French cookbooks and that kind of stuff. So not being a very good student, I dropped out of college at the University of South Florida in 1972 and went to work at Bern's Steakhouse and in the kitchen. And so that started my culinary career. I wanted to work in wine, but I was quote unquote too young to drink. And so I worked for 10 years as a professional chef with a very classic background in French cuisine and in pastries and that kind of stuff. And then the wine was my sort of avocation. And this was before being a chef was hip and cool like it is today. In 1979, I was working in Atlanta, Georgia. I was actually chef for a group of Chinese restaurants. I can operate a 3-walk professional Chinese station. And I found a job in retail, Happy Herman's in Atlanta, Georgia, and did that from 79 to 86. I'd been talking with Tor Kenward from Tor fame, Cabernet Sauvignon fame, and had gone from Happy Herman's to being an importer and broker. I did that for 3 years. Tor invited me out to Napa Valley to work with him at Beringer. I said, heck yeah, and I did that. And when I got to Beringer, it also coincided with the Institute of Masters of Wine actually allowing international candidates to come sit the Master of Wine exam. So in 1989, I was accepted into the program, became one of the most epic failures in the history of the Institute of Masters of Wine. And then in 1990, I went to the wrong writing seminar for 3 days, and it was supposed to be to help organize my thoughts and pass the Master of Wine exam, but it was for electrical engineers, and it was critical thinking and disruptive innovation, and it changed my life. And that's the reason I'm mentioning. I'll refer to it as we talk about other things, but basically it enabled me to pass the Master of Wine exam and left me totally different human being. So in 1990, I passed the MW exam and continued my work with Beringer. I was director of communications and director of international business development, and did that until 1999. So I was with Beringer 11 years, 88 to 99. And then I started out on my own entrepreneurial pursuits. So the key things that I do today are the pragmatic side of me, which is the winebusinesseducation.com. And then my real passion is when I passed the Master of Wine exam after taking the disruptive innovation and critical thinking course with the electrical engineers, I knew profoundly so much was wrong in what I was doing. You know, I was the wine and food pairing guru and just had this cognitive dissonance. Now, something's wrong with this. And so I started studying sensory sciences, and that has now parlayed into perceptual sciences. And at some point, I'll explain the difference. And so two ends of what I do is I teach wine business. I'm a faculty at a number of universities. I do business consulting and product development and whatever around the world. I do my research into consumer attitudes and preferences and kind of trying to change the direction of the wine industry to a more of a consumer focus, in not any less of the product focus, but we've just put too much focus on the product. So I apply that to product development and consulting. There you go.
Yeah, amazing career. Still going.
Absolutely.
Still going.
Like I said, and I'm really old.
So you had mentioned this concept of disruption, right? For this, lecture that you sat through and how that kind of changed your way of thinking about wine. We are both big fans of your book, which is called Why You Like the Wines You Like. And this is sort of the major premise of the book, is this disrupting this old way of, or, quote unquote, old way of thinking about wine, food and wine pairings, why people like what they like, and then why they shouldn't necessarily like the things that they like. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your concept of wine education and how you like to talk to people about wine and wine preferences?
Yay. And I get to try out on you guys to see if how I frame this actually communicates and works now. So,
okay, cool. Go for it.
working with my co-writer for a new book that hopefully will be out at end of, I guess sort of early next year.
Well, I was also going to ask you, what's on the burner now? What are you working on? So we can talk about that later too.
The hard part for me is being, neurodivergent doesn't help this, is communicating the concepts that I see that are different from what most people see. That's that's the way that my brain works. So it's culminated into the following. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. So perception is an illusion, and it's human beings taking energy and putting it into thoughts and emotions. And our sensory system is converting electrical signals and molecules and atoms into mass and smells and taste and light, the electromagnetic part of it and whatever. And so it starts with a premise that human beings don't experience reality. We interpret reality. And everyone is unique in how we're interpreting this energy. Okay? A lot of similarities and a lot of commonalities and a lot lot of places where we'll agree that, okay, we can hear this or see this or smell it. But what we're not aware of is how vastly different it can be for different people. So when I had my epiphany or nervous breakdown with the electrical engineers and then passed the Master of Wine exam, I thought, oh, you know what? I got the cred now. So I got that part covered. I'm going to spend the rest of my life just running down all this crap that doesn't make sense to me anymore. So how that's culminated in, there's something called mind genomics, and a guy named Howard, and I'll think of his last name soon. But he said there's kind of two ways to view products and view concepts and whatever. One is a vertical model. So a vertical model is people see a product or something, they conceptualize something, and then you have to convince other people that this is what it is. It's kind of like the elephant and the three blind people, right? And so wine is in this vertical vortex, if you can imagine. And I'm sitting here gesticulating into nothingness, right? But the vertical model of wine is that supposedly experts are better at telling you what you should perceive than you are. Right? Here are the words to describe this is good wine and this is bad wine. This is what wine goes with what food and so forth. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. And we know a lot of experts don't agree. And we know certainly an awful lot of consumers don't agree. But anyways, that's the vertical model. Horizontal model is actually the opposite of that, where you look at the spectrum of consumers and then spend your time, well, what do you like and why do you like it? How would you describe this? And what Howard Muskowitz applied this thinking to was spaghetti sauce. And so the one who actually changed the model of marketing spaghetti sauce from, okay, everybody's spaghetti sauce has, tomatoes in it and an old world recipe or grandma's recipe or something. But you make a spaghetti sauce and you convince people why your spaghetti sauce is the best one. He thought, what if we went out and asked people what they wanted in a spaghetti sauce, and then we made a lot of different ones? Okay, so they found out that there was enough people who wanted a basil tomato sauce. Other people wanted extra meat. Other people wanted no meat, a meatless, a vegetarian. 4 cheeses. And the reason they did 4 cheeses is because 4 different cheeses actually came up in the consumer research, and they decided to put all 4 in. That way, whoever wanted the Parmesan or the mozzarella or the Asiago or whatever would have their way. And it literally changed the face of spaghetti sauce, right?
Yes.
And so that's called disruptive innovation. And that's what the electrical engineers were discussing. It was actually how to make a clock that worked on a VCR that consumers could actually use. I know, I found that
The bane of our generations is setting the time on the VCR back in the day, right?
Exactly right. And they had all this data about, people would look at the instructions and say, I don't need the clock, or then they were forced to have to do it and did it. But 92% of all the clocks on a VCR in the world were just a blinking reminder, you're too stupid to set me. And so I started thinking about wine like that, saying, Jesus, I know that what we think are these traditional classic pairings aren't. The French never paired wine and food. That's all BS. Oh, but if it grows together, it goes together. Okay, why? And then we come up with our rationale. So anyways, I decided to start running all this down. And it only occurred to me literally less than 6 months ago did I learn of Howard Muskowitz's work and this vertical versus horizontal model. I refer to the current model of wine and wine education and wine recommendations as the vortex. All right. Think of the vortex as like a tornado. And if you can actually rise above that, there's all these consumers around the world that want different things. We just haven't, as an industry, decided to leverage that or decided to listen to consumers. We're too busy trying to tell them what they should like, how they should describe it, what food and wine they should have together, which is is great for the consumers that are in the vortex, but what about the rest of the world? So right now, what I'm doing is I'm shifting the model from sensory sciences, which is a bottoms-up approach, starting with the molecules or the source of stimulation, to a perceptual approach, which is you. Each of us has our perception. How can we group people differently? How can we listen? How can we change our thinking to adapt to the market, not trying to convince the market that our spaghetti sauce is the one they have to have. So that's what I'm doing. Does that make any sense?
Very much. I always appreciated that technical story. I had a clinical engineering background, and I always have a great respect for technical
bingo.
writers. So
Yeah.
I can hear where you're coming from. And I wanted to know that experience, is that what led you to say there was no standard language for wine and gives you like motivation to try to find something to communicate wine better?
Yeah, that's a perfect example, Mark. Thanks. Because, and it's not to find the better communication models. We've already got way too many words, too many ways to describe wine. And what we don't get is, all right, so if we go to the vortex, right, the vertical, here's how you should describe this smell in Pinot Noir. It smells like raspberries because I smelled that. This has been, that's the way we do it. Well, I was just on BBC World One Radio a number of months ago with the lead scientist at the Manel Chemical Senses Center. She doesn't have the receptor for the molecule that most people would say that smells like raspberries. So she doesn't have that. So how does that work? Oh,
Yeah.
That
wait a
goes
minute.
back to the cilantro whole thing in the wine world, right?
Exactly.
Or
So
me
the
with
perception.
banana, because I can't smell banana in beer.
Well, and you guys are just queuing me up. By the way, listeners, we didn't discuss this at all. The banana smell is fundamentally isoamyl acetate is the molecule, and it's got derivatives. There's a benzyl acetate and whatever, but benzyl acetate is also in wine. And I work with mentors and researchers all around the world and have been since roughly 1989. And if that same molecule is given to 100 people, there are people that have what's called specific anosmia. So a lot of people can't smell it. But more interesting is a very almost even proportions of people who do smell it. One group will smell bananas and the other smells industrial chemical kind of cleaning fluid
Oh,
from the same
interesting.
molecule.
Right.
So who's right? So the perceptual system is a combination of your genetics and then your biological receptors and what you're able to perceive. And then that information has to get to your brain and neurotransmitters send that information. And there are positive and negative reinforcements to your neurotransmitter system, sort of your reward and punishment system. Then your brain processes it. And when you learn things like learn new words and language, it's called brain plasticity, and it's how we reorganize information. And then there's psychology. There's the crap that happens to you that you associate with this. So the perceptual model is looking at this whole universe of consumers that we're all different. And what this then means, going to your question about language, different languages needed for different people. Some people really respond well to a point system or whatever. And especially when Robert Parker was the guy doing the points, it meant if Robert Parker gave it a lot of points, it was going to be highly concentrated, extracted, have a lot of new oak in it, be really high in astringency, high in alcohol. Bingo. And if you don't like that, that's not the system for you, and he's not your guy.
You're right.
But genetically, there's a whole group of people, when they taste really high alcohol, it tastes sweet to them. They're not getting that burn and whatever. So the point system, especially the Parker and the Jim Lobby model, was actually to the intended audience that responded to that, the perfect system. And to the people who have the most taste buds, who live in this hypersensitive kind of a world, dry wine doesn't work. Sweet wine drinkers have the most taste buds. They have the highest sensitivity, and they need a different language. They respond to things differently. And then you've got people sort of all around the middle, and people who have learned because they went to wine classes that reorganized their brain. So God only knows what's going on in there now. So the answer to the whole language and recommendation thing is a bigger requirement for people in the wine industry to adapt to and be able to give up our personal opinions that we're right and you're wrong and this is how it's got to be and whatever, and go, I don't know, let's have a little conversation here. What kind of things do you like? How can I best serve you? In the wine, that drives the wine industry nuts.
Well, and it probably drives a lot of people nuts, especially in the wine education sphere, because as Mark and I are, you're trying to distill it down to something that will be teachable to a large audience of people. And especially for our international educational groups, you're trying to make it so that it's a one size fits all for people all over the world. And your take on it is very different. It's like, well, no, because we're all individuals and everything, about our psychology and our physiology is different from somebody else. So our perception is going to be different too.
Exactly. And that's where the pushback comes from the wine education end, because we're in the vortex. This is how it's be. Don't disrupt this. I spent my life learning this. God dang it. Don't take it away. But the funny thing is, it's just really adding a component of something I termed as perceptual individuality. We need to teach that in the wine class, and it's easily teachable. And this is where people can go to my Vinotype, MYV as in Victor, INOTYPE, like a phenotype, but with vino. And you can take a little quiz and it'll tell you about yourselves, your sensitivities, your hypersensitivities. It's not all that difficult, but Wine 101 should start with, we're going to talk about perception, not sensory science, but perception. We're going to talk about how your perception is unique. And we're also going to do some demonstrations so we can see how differently the person sitting next to you or that you're married to or want to be going out with or whatever, how differently they perceive things. And it's so cool.
The Vinotype thing was it's just genius to me, because the importance of learning what you like and being able to explain what you like to the person you're buying the wine from is so important. And you had different genres in that. Did you come up with that, the groupings?
The research came up with that. This is sort of things really have been odd for me. In mostly a good way. But when I started to work with these different scientists, it's like, what? You guys are doing such cool things, and we're just doing this lame, repetitive, BS-based, pseudo-scientific crap in the wine industry. What's wrong with us? So early on in all this, you guys probably know from the book, I'm the Swami of Umami. And when I started talking about umami 45 years ago, literally people would get angry. And this is including sensory scientists and wine. It's crap. What are you talking about? Whatever. So, talking about new things in the wine framework, it gets people really upset. And I just kept with it, trying to understand. And so we can make the changes. It's not all that daunting. And the wine industry needs it now. We need this so badly.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine with Mark and Kim. And today, our special guest is Master of Wine, Tim Hanni. You can find more information about us at our website, thewww.wine, and more information about Tim on his numerous websites. You can find winebusinesseducation.com. You can also find myvinotype.com, and on social media at Tim Hanni MW. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Wonderful World of Wine. Mark and I have been chatting today with Tim Hanni, who has written a couple of different books and is disrupting the way that we teach and talk about wine. So you had mentioned before the break about the current sort of situation in the wine industry and that change is very necessary at the moment about how we communicate educate about wine, how we sell wine. I wanted to get a little bit more of your thoughts about kind of the current state of the industry and maybe what we can be doing a little bit better for our interactions with other wine consumers and getting new wine consumers.
Yay.
That's a lot. I know. Sorry.
And I do go off on tangents.
Well, I gave you a nice, nice big something to bite into there.
So one of the things that's been rattling in my head for a long, long time is over premiumization of wine. And I tried to do this just for my own brain. This is pertaining to what's going on with pushback about wine and something at a global level that's a looming potential catastrophe for wine. And the wine business part of me, which is a forced pragmatism in my neural chaos, wine became really special. And I've seen it from the 60s to present, and the development of the elitism and the snobbery, the invention of wine and food pairing when it never really existed prior to the 1960s, the over-intellectualization and the pseudoscience. And I was actually one of the leaders in all the BS that was being created. But as my perspective changed and I started to get, wait a minute, we've really taken this too far. We're starting to get pushback from consumers. We're starting to overlook history and traditions. The French always loved sweet wines. And we've got this idea, Americans like sweet wines because we're immature and unsophisticated and stupid trailer trash. Well, no, wine wasn't sweet. The French would put cassis in it, or the Spanish would make sangria, and you could put a cube of sugar in your Barolo if that's what grandma wanted in Italy, and whatever. So we've really just created this educational nightmare of misinformation and pseudoscience. The over-premiumization came along with the point system, not as a law or whatever, but the people who actually think neurologically are geared towards the point system have certain perceptual traits. They need more input. They don't see as many colors. They don't see contrast as greatly. Their hearing is diminished, so they need, the stereo turned up or the radio or whatever. And the point system's perfect for them, but they're the people who run companies. They actually have a very specific neural pattern, and it's goal-oriented, and it's based on different parameters. So in the search for more points, more intensity, higher alcohol, etc., vineyard prices went through the roof, wine prices went crazy, and wine just got too damned expensive. I've been in the rare wine business. I've had wines that make people drool and whatever, but they were nowhere near the prices that wine are today. And then wine education along with this started the story, well, if your palate's mature, you'll like dry wine, even if you think it sucks. And we started this whole new discourse about wine quality and started stereotyping consumers by the wines they like the most. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you're a sweet wine drinker, what's wrong with you?
That was Moscato.
Ooh, yeah, Moscato. Actually, you remember when that became a thing around 2007?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know who did that?
You.
Me.
You did that?
I took I took two clients who combined were the largest producers of Moscato in the world. At the time, in 2007, they were roughly 400,000 cases a year. And by 2014, they were 10 million cases. And I did that by going up out of the vortex, looking at what drove white Zinfandel drinkers and who they were, not who the wine industry thinks they were. My mother-in-law is a PhD in economics. She's a millionaire, smart as hell, awesome banjo player. And she loves white Zinfandel because she has way more taste buds, not because she's stupid. and failing to recognize this, the consumer data that I've been collecting since roughly the late 90s, tens of thousands of surveys and hands-on tastings and whatever. We identified a market segment, say they are underserved. Moscato's Italian. It's easy to pronounce. It doesn't have the baggage of the white Zinfandel. It's white, so you can't see that somebody's drinking a blush wine. And so I took Sutter Home and Gallo from their market leading position to massive. And from 2012 to 2019, I was hired annually to come kind of do a wake-up call for the Mondavi tasting room and hospitality team every year. And from 2012 to 2019, in the Napa Valley at the Mondavi tasting room, the number one selling wine was their Moscato d'Oro. It's the equivalent of $60 a bottle, roughly, right? And so the wine industry has become more and more disconnected from the market, more and more disconnected from truth and the reality of, the culture of wine, and then overcomplicated the language and put these requirements on what you're supposed to taste and smell. And that's getting worse, by the way, both in the Master of Wine program and the Master Sommelier and the WSET. And then all of a sudden we've got overpriced products, a disconnect with consumers, and we're wondering, wait, now what do we do?
Yeah, it definitely makes it harder and harder for people to feel comfortable with the idea of just ordering a glass of wine. I love what you're saying about wines that are lightly sweet, not this, heavy viscous style of white wines, but these easy to drink, sweeter style, because there is always, always, always the need in the market for that particular style. And whether it's white Zinfandel, whether it's Moscato, and who knows what the next iteration of this style is going to be, but there's always that need because there's always people who want to drink that style of wine.
That's right. And who always did, but
Right.
but here's the thing on going to the viscous thing. If you were to go back 100 years ago in France, what was champagne like in France 100 years ago?
This is such a good question. Did you know I'm a champagne specialist?
Yeah, well, tell me what you know.
Trends in champagne have not originally, but 150 years ago, way sweeter than they are now.
Yeah,
And
but how sweet?
like almost Coca-Cola sweet.
Actually, 30% sweeter than Coca-Cola.
So even more sweet than Coke. Yeah. So
140 grams per liter was the standard. And so dry champagne, and then we wonder why the language is screwed up.
Yeah.
So as a champagne specialist, a sec champagne, right? Technically, what is the grams per liter residual sugar for dry champagne?
For sec,
Yeah.
sec is like 18 to 32 grams per liter.
Yeah. I think that's actually could be extra dry. So I think it's 30,
No, extra dry is 12 to 17. Sorry.
12 to 17. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 18 to 32. So 18 to 32 grams per liter was dry in relationship to what? Right. And so this is the lack of critical thinking and where we fall flat in education. And so the extra dry started to become most popular. And then the popularization of the champagne cocktail. Well, that's not sweet enough. Let's put a cube of sugar in it and a little dash of bitters. Right. And then the French started mocking the English, calling them brutes and sauvage. So they were drinking these crude wines,
Which were very dry, which were much drier than what.
which were much drier. But what most people don't recognize is that also 100 years ago, the French and English weren't very compatible on a culinary standpoint. But
Not like they are now either.
they aren't. But people are learning about the word anosmia. It's a loss of smell. And so COVID brought the word anosmia out of the sensory sciences into common knowledge. My mentor in anthropology, Dr. Lionel Tiger, who's one of the foremost anthropologists in the world, he thinks that England, because of industrial pollution, back when they had the pea soup fog and whatever, there was so much particulate matter in the air in England that basically the entire country lost its sense of smell.
Interesting.
Yeah. And now we've got new generations. Duh. We were that once, remember?
I do remember.
Do you remember? Do you remember what? Well, you guys, unfortunately, I think I'm another generation ahead. But I actually remember people when the Beatles came out in their suits, in their trim haircuts, and whatever. Those ragged, derelict people in this rock and roll, and the kids kids are going to hell. They're all going to hell. And so we've got new generations that are going, I don't need you to tell me what's good. Let me try some wine and let me figure it out. But this other stuff's way less expensive. Why is the wine so expensive? Why are you guys such a bunch of buttheads?
Tim, I always appreciate following you that you're always so open and love answering questions and always give feedback on like you are today. I wanted to touch base. I read many articles about you being sober in the industry. And I was wondering if we could just talk a little bit about how is that possible? I always have a hard being a wine taster when I buy and I hear from people selling me wine, well, that person doesn't taste, that person doesn't taste. How does that work with you being in this industry? It must have been such a change for you.
It was a change, yeah.
Do you feel like your senses are better now?
No. Here's the thing. Nobody's senses are better or worse. Women aren't better tasters, but they have certain genetic predispositions that are different. Doesn't make them better. Actually, it makes them worse for people who have different sensitivities. Let me go back to the origin and then I'll answer the question first. So in 1990, I passed the Master of Wine examination. I was bankrupt. I had finalized my first marriage of 14 years, and things were great, but not great. Have you ever had that in your life?
Sure, life.
Yeah, exactly. Life was happening. So I was playing in a band with some winery people in the Napa Valley, and one of the guys, Bob Foley from Markham, whose grandfather invented the art of Foleying, by the way, and at the end of movie credits, Foley soundstage and whatever.
Oh.
So he said, I've got a friend and she's a singer and she's looking for a gig. And so this singer started to play with our band. And then I went down to Meridian Vineyards in Paso Robles in 1990, and the band didn't play for a while. When I came back up to Napa and had passed the Master of Wine, I was divorced. My wife's gone. The singer in the band was getting divorced. And I thought, well, damn, she's kind of cute. So we hooked up and we were just a train wreck ready to happen. And we got married, and I saw my life playing out like every relationship I'd ever had in my life, like not working. And so I thought, maybe it's not them, maybe it's me. I'd known I was an alcoholic for a long time, and I come from a long line of alcoholics. Somebody should have gotten a clue when I was 14 and decided, if I learn about wine, they let me drink. And so I went into recovery in 1993. What year are we now? I think that's about right. So 32 years ago, I went into recovery and had no clue what was going to happen. I'd just been promoted to Director of International Business Development for Beringer. I was the wine and food pairing guru and whatnot. So I stopped drinking. And when you talk about miracles, I've been there, I've done that, I've had it all, as they say. And one of the things I had to wonder, well, now what the hell am I going to do? And working with I've got to be very, very clear on this. What I do as a professional in the wine industry is I work with the professionals who I committed to following their instructions and so forth. And one of the things that came up was that I was fully committed. If I needed to stop to keep my sobriety, if I needed to get out of the wine industry, I would have. I do taste and spit, but it's really not a part of any expertise for me now. It's more for other reasons. And it's with an absolute and resolute commitment that if ever I feel like taking a drink, I will get out of the wine business pronto and stop doing that. So if anybody's in recovery, should be in recovery, if you know somebody you think should be in recovery, email me, call me, whatever, that's fine too. But I've got my program and it's with the professionals that I kind of gave things over to. Okay, so it's like, all right, now what the hell am I going to do? And I actually thought, well, you know what? I've got all this cognitive dissonance, right? Things that just don't add up. I've earned this credential. What if I quit trying to pretend to be the expert? You should like this because Tim likes this, or I rated it this or that, and spent the rest of my life just running down these inconsistencies. So that had started around 1990 and came to a head when I decided I married the woman of my dreams, and I'm only going to screw it up if I keep drinking. So why don't I spend the rest of my life running down, learning more, changing, and quit trying to the pretense of you should like what I like, describe it the way I do, have the wine with the food I say, etc., and see what happens. So that's what I did.
It was your
That's
own
amazing.
personal way of getting out of the vortex, I suppose.
You know, I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't know how confronting it would be and whatever, but it's also just so freaking fun. And somebody says, "Oh, what do you think of this wine?" I said, "Oh, well, what do you think of it?"
Yeah.
I may like it or not, but the real question is, well, I'm trying to appreciate it better. Okay, well, do you like it? Well, sort of. Well, I could tell you a story, and that might make you like it better.
So that what you said, you don't feel that your taste has gotten better. Does that also then mean the more we taste that we won't get better?
Well, this is the curse of what I learned with the electrical engineers. What do you mean by better?
Yeah, I guess better descriptors.
So, the study was done in Bordeaux, 2001, I think. It's in the book. Frederic Brochet and Albert Moreau. They put together 54 trained wine students, and these are people whose families are in the industry. They've been in wine all their life, and had them come up with descriptive lexicons for red wines and white wines, every word you could possibly think of, and then put that into a master lexicon. Here's this list of hundreds of descriptors, and then said, here's a white wine. We want to see how closely experts use the same words or not. And that was a ruse, by the way. So here's the white wine, and they said, we're focusing on smell. And here's the descriptors that you have to work with for red and white. You can use any descriptor to describe this white wine. Okay, it's lychees and apples and flowery and vanilla, sometimes spicy, and every now and then a cassis would show up or whatever, but it was all white wine words. Then they did the red wine, and now it's plums and cherries and smoky and oaky and all this kind of stuff. And it was the same wine. They colored the white wine with odorless grape phenolics. And this is the neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. When you learn to associate words with colors and places and whatever, it reorganizes your brain. It doesn't make it better. In fact, it also can be called an educational bias. But you start to make shit up. Oops, can I say that? Part of my neurodiversity is also a bit of Tourette, so I apologize. And so what happens is literally we forced to come up with these wild descriptors. We make stuff up. And just like we do with wine and food pairing, we're not pairing wine and food, we're pairing metaphors. Oh, the heavy wine goes with the heavy, cows are heavy, and you hit them with a tractor that's it's red. A salmon's not as big as a cow, but it's a bigger fish and it's kind of red. And that metaphorically describes Pinot Noir. Try unseasoned salmon with Pinot Noir and Cabernet and white wine. It just sucks.
Yeah. It's the spices, right?
And I'm using that in a technical term.
Sure. Yeah.
It increases the succosity of the wine. And take the salt off of a steak. Cook a rare, well-marbled steak. Try your intense red wine and the fat with no salt, no seasoning, no nothing. All right? This whole red wine and the fat smooths the palate and the proteins do that. It's all BS. Absolutely no basis for it whatsoever. It's the salt that you put on the steak. And we could be observing people. When you see somebody reach for the salt shaker and they haven't even tasted their food, instead of, "Ooh, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me and shaming me," say, "Oh, wow, I just learned that's the number one sign you have the most taste buds at the table," because that's the truth. And that can be scientifically validated. So we don't understand behaviors. We don't understand preferences. So we judge and we make stuff up and we make it even more complicated and it keeps getting more expensive.
So those people are using the salt because they sense bitter better than everybody else. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Cool.
Bitter hypersensitivity is kind of the lead indicator. This is an overgeneralization, but it's an indicator of general sensitivity of vision, of hearing, of tactile, and that's the whole premise of the My Vinotype thing. Mm-hmm. My Vinotype was the algorithms were built not on the metaphors of why you like coffee and what you add, and what's really been fun fun in the years since I created the My Vinotype is to see the ripoffs that let's put bacon in there because if you like bacon, then you like a smoky, oaky wine, and which is all BS.
Yeah.
Everybody likes bacon, even vegetarians, but dang, it makes them really, really do soul searching I can't have bacon? So anyways,
Well, Tim,
yeah,
I mean, we could talk all day with you, and that's so many.
we could talk all day about salt. So anybody who wants,
Everything.
We
look
could
up
talk all about
salt.
bacon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because being worth your salt was currency. It was a social status thing. If you were below the salt at a French banquet, that means the salt shaker or salt cellar, it was called, was placed strategically on the table, and the people who sat at one end of the table couldn't have any of it, and so you weren't worth your salt. But it was also how they paid the Roman soldiers. To be worth your salt meant you get your pay when they paid you in salt. Look up salt and the science of salt. And salt suppresses bitterness, elevating the other tastes around it. So it's really unique. People don't like the taste of salt. They like what salt does to bitterness so that you can taste other things. And if you're hypersensitive to bitterness, you need more of it to push it
Yeah,
down.
that's the whole take it with the grain of salt, correct?
Exactly. That was
Yeah.
actually take the bitter pill with a great grain of salt, but it was also thought to be an antidote for poison. But don't get me started.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tim. We appreciate everything.
Can I pose a closing thought?
Go. Yep.
Yeah.
Love yourself and try and recognize how you're similar or different to people in preferences and not judging, oh, they like this, so something's wrong with them or something's wrong with me, even worse. With wine, we've just got to change the model. We've got to go to the horizontal. There's this unbelievable realm of consumers out there. We just don't know how to strategically adapt our communications and our marketing. Wine and food pairing, if you love chocolate and red wine, have it. Don't stop, but just recognize 80% of people are going to find it disgusting. That's okay. So it's about building our knowledge of others and how our opinions are created. The perceptual system that has us about ready to crash and burn is a democracy or whatever we're doing, right? People build their perception individually and uniquely, and we got a lot to benefit by trying to understand our differences and our similarities.
Great, Tim.
Some
Thank you.
wonderful closing thoughts. Thank you, Tim.
Oh,
This has
that was
been
pretty
just
cool, huh?
so great to have you on our show today.
Thank you guys so much. So you guys are awesome, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Today's special guest has been Tim Hanni. He's the founder of the winebusinesseducation.com. He's also the founder of myvinotype.com. For more information about us, you can go to our website, thewww.wine. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio in Franklin, Massachusetts. You can find us online on Facebook and Instagram at The Wonderful World of Wine. Cheers.
Cheers.